Good afternoon, members of the committee. As your corporate officer, I am calling this December 4th Policy Development and Review Committee meeting to order at 1:06 p.m. We would like to recognize that today's meeting is being held on the traditional territory of the Lillooet Nation. The first order of business is the election of chair and vice chair as required in November of each year by the Local Government Act and the SLRD's procedures bylaw. Before I call for nominations, I will outline the process we will follow. So starting with the office of the chair, I will call for nominations from members. The nominee must then consent to the nomination. If there is only one candidate nominated, that candidate will be declared by acclamation. If there is more than one candidate nominated, an election by secret ballot will be conducted. Ballots will be counted, the number of votes will then be shared, and the candidate with the most votes will be declared chair. With that, I would like to call for nominations of chair for the Policy Development and Review Committee for the year 2024. Calling a first time for nominations of the chair. Director Birch Jones.
I'd like to nominate Director Rainbow.
Director Rainbow, do you consent to the nomination?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Calling a second time for nominations of chair. Calling a third and final time for nominations of chair. Okay, seeing no further nominations, I'll declare the nominations closed. As no other nominations have been received, Director Rainbow is acclaimed as chair of the committee, and I'll turn the meeting over for elections of vice chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, do I have nominations for the position of vice chair for this committee, please?
I'll nominate Chris.
Chris,
Thank you.
do you accept that, Chris?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further nominations? How many times do I have to say that? 3 times? Any further nominations? That's twice. Any further nominations? That's 3 times. Hearing none, Chris is declared vice chair. Great, thank you. So have the approval of the agenda, please. Motion to approve the agenda. Moved by Stoner, second by Clettengill. In favour, opposed, motion carries. We have a consent agenda. 1 item on it. And a motion to approve that. Moved by Director Birch Jones, seconded by Director Pettingill. All in favour, opposed, motion carries. Any business arising from that, from those minutes? No. New business. Now, at this point, I should ask, when's Tracy joining us? Is she?
Yeah, as soon as you're ready, I'll bring her in.
Oh, please do.
Okay.
Yeah. Tracy, good afternoon. There she is. Good afternoon. Hello. So we have 3 people here in the room. Jen Ford, Chris Pettingill, and myself. And then Jenna Stoner is on Zoom, and so is Vivian Birch Jones. And we are at item 5.1 on our agenda, which is Governance Excellence Board Survey Results. So at this point, I'd like to turn the meeting over to you.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for having me. I believe that we have the presentation that can be pulled up on screen. Okay. Excellent efficiency, SLRD. I appreciate the help. So just by way of introduction, this GovRx, although we were doing it under the umbrella of the governance improvement project that the SLRD is doing, these are questions that we've used with a number of, I think with 21 different local governments and regional districts. And spoiler alert, your results are very good, which doesn't mean that there's not an opportunity for governance improvement, but you as a regional district board should be very proud of yourselves, unless you're all just, unless the board's just easy markers. This is a reflection of a board that is doing good work. If we can go to the next screen, please. What you'll see is there's the different areas that we go through in terms of, basically bundles of skills that are indicators of high functioning governance. And what you'll see is that this board, by its own grading, is doing very well on the, and I'll just walk through each of these skills. What we're also interested in, though, is a range of options. You know, you'll see that in general, anything that isn't burgundy or gray is not an area of concern. Now, just for clarity, not being an area of concern doesn't mean there isn't still opportunities to enhance your abilities in those areas. So I want to be clear that, you know, but we don't want to break the things that are working well, even as we're fixing other things. So you do want to be aware of the areas. And, you know, again, with a board as diverse as yours, we don't necessarily know whether everybody's evaluating the same, you know, through the same lens. But you'll see that in general, this is very positive. On the decision-making, with respect to this process, do you want me just to run through the entire presentation and then open it up for questions at the end? Is that your normal process?
I think let's try that.
Okay, and because I've got some comments that, with your permission, I'll slide in, although I've got more detail as well, but particularly on the input from the community, there were 2 comments explaining some of those lower scores, which is just highlighting the challenge that at times directors from outside an effective area, particularly if it's an EA area, for example, you know, municipal directors may not necessarily know, they're not directly seeking input. So they're relying on the input of the director representing that area, which isn't in and of itself a problem, but I do think it's just something to be aware of, is how do we know how communities are feeling? Is there, so it's just something to bear in mind. But even the, you know, the comment around rarely, it was more about the board as a whole, not necessarily doing that on each and every decision that comes before the board. I'm wondering, to the chair, it might, I'll fly through all of these and then we can flip back to any of these comments. But so we'll just go on to the next one, unless somebody's got something pressing that pops up. So on the next slide, please. Ethics and responsibility. This is one where there are, first of all, again, very good results. We have a tendency as adults to go to the lowest scoring results and wonder what went wrong. And I've done this with a couple of other regional districts just in the last few weeks, and your worst result would be their best result. So just in terms of comparable, you know, comparing you to others. But following their own policies and bylaws was a little bit lower on this one. And that related more to an understanding of sometimes, you know, needing to do a solution that's made for a specific area. There's also comments around the need to perhaps modernize some of your policies around your procedures bylaw, for example, was mentioned, just that some things are maybe not quite as flexible and fluid as might serve you as a board moving forward. And I think that's, you know, true around legislative tools that we have. Also around this, and you'll see it comes up a little bit later as well, is not necessarily knowing on the policy what the delegated authority is to different organizations and entities. So having a bit more clarity around, you know, what are the policies around how things reach the board and the extent to which there's delegation, for example, to committees or to your senior staff. One comment I do want to make is a very high degree of respect to senior staff demonstrated in all of the comments by elected officials. And I just, in 2023, almost 2024, I will say that's not always the case when we have these surveys, but just a general, very respectful tone around the support that's provided.
Excuse me, Tracy. Dr. Birch-Jones, you have a question?
Thanks. And I know Tracy said she wanted to run right through this, but your comment that we immediately go to the low scores on this one, ethics and responsibility, I immediately zoomed in on the ones below 4 at the top and thought, Oh, so you're saying some of our own policies and bylaws might be outdated? We might be moving around them in a way to make things work in a good way. That's
Yeah.
one way of looking at this.
The comments, through the chair, the comments didn't highlight this as a huge risk area, rather an opportunity in working with management to perhaps assess whether there's a level of support that could be provided by clearer delegation.
Excellent. Thank you.
But I think you're right. The title of this page, this is not a comment on the ethics being demonstrated by the board. So I appreciate that, you catching that, because I wouldn't want that to be misconstrued. I think the other one that's a little bit lower is regional districts struggle where it is implicit in the role of an electoral area director to they are the one elected official for that area, and your board recognizes that, but also recognizes that it's challenging at times to know whether and this is for municipal and electoral area directors, which hat you have on. And so the bias was it wasn't conflicts of interest on the second one at the top there. It was just the challenge, which is candidly just part and parcel of your structure of which hat are we wearing. And the only advice I would give you through this committee as a board is labeling the hat you're wearing is often the most effective way to do that. Is just I'm speaking as, and I had an example of this with a regional district I was working with not too long ago, where the electoral area director in that case said, as an electoral area director, my region doesn't support this. As a regional district director, I will be voting for this. That's quite a courageous way to navigate that, and not always the way to do it. But it was, this is one that I think needs to be talked openly about how challenging this is. Thank you, though. And I have a suggestion coming, through the recommendations at the very end around that as well. So the next one, please. Communication. The comments in this area were generally very positive around that this board is doing well. Not, nobody thought you were perfect as a board, but the board did feel that the decorum and respect was improving. There is discussions, and it comes up as well in the meetings, is that at times, the emotional temperature gets high on certain issues. But in general, just very positive comments, even about peers here. Communication protocols and best practices. The comments that inform that were generally people behave very effectively as governors on social media, but sometimes there's just a little lack of clarity around who speaks to what, and what is the range of options and how far can individual directors go. But again, this was not an acute problem, just an observation about a lack of clarity at times. And this is me giving just my own opinion on the SLRD. I will say, as an outsider not from your region, you as a region did an extraordinary job through your fire season of messaging and really not confusing messaging. Just as somebody watching, obviously residents will have a different experience as they're affected quite differently. But as it relates to sort of this formal communication and protocols, you did an extraordinarily good job. And others have noted that in the sector from outside your region. So I think that's a credit to it. But just maybe not having clarity around, even on social media, when are people getting close to the line, and when is commentary too far? But this wasn't people taking shots at their colleagues doing something wrong. There was just a couple of comments about not being actually certain how far was where the line was. The consistency of messaging was certainly high. You'll notice that some of the areas where we hear other communities struggling around disrespect are not areas that you have, knock on wood, everybody, if you don't mind, while we're talking about this, but that level of decorum seems to be something that you as a board have taken very seriously. And it's not easy in a regional district model. the structure makes friction more likely in your model. And the fact that you're doing well is something that I would encourage through this committee to the board to celebrate a bit, because I think sometimes we don't notice what's working well until it slides. And so I think that's something that is unusually high and something to be very proud of. The requests you'll see in the far right in the middle there, the board responds to communication from the community. Again, there were questions around what can electoral area directors expect in terms of support with that messaging, and just a little bit of a lack of clarity around, we often talk that people are using too much staff time, but we don't always articulate how much is appropriate. And so just that clarity of the kind of help, including being able to be responsive to residents' concerns, sort of not the capital C communication, but more of the day-to-day transactional communication. Anything else on this before we move on? Okay, next slide, please. Your meetings. One of the things that came up in this is just maybe a little bit more time talking about what are we trying to achieve when agenda items come. You generally find your meetings are appropriate, your colleagues are coming prepared. But my understanding is you have one meeting a month, so that puts a lot of weight on those meetings. And this again circles back to comments around delegation again. Are you using, is there an opportunity to use some of your committees, particularly around electoral area directors, even more effectively, so that that they know what discretion they have to actually make decisions versus needing to, come to the board? Is there clarity around that? Again, at times there's discussions that are getting more operational than some of you may have liked, but this is still not an acute problem. It's an observation and not necessarily a problem. One of the pieces of advice for the chair, and this would be for benefits for all of the that are running committees, particularly if having just a timer that sets a break of even 5 minutes every hour allows, even if things are getting emotional, people to cool down, people to stretch. We don't take enough breaks in all of our meetings. The other side benefit of that is taking more breaks, whether it's in committee or at the board itself, is it does encourage the conversation to wrap up before the next break. So sometimes having conversations that are sort of going around, you've got a bit of a hard deadline on that. And I've just found that that's improved even, just people getting frustrated, with just needing a break to cool down. So that's something that I would encourage this committee to share with the chairs of other committees as well, just as a piece of advice. And I do encourage you to actually have a timer, formalize that, just at taking a break, and or something a little bit more than just when we get around to it, because otherwise there's usually slides as people are in the middle of a really good point. And you'll see that even the occasionalies here look low, but most of the time when I do this, I see gray and burgundies on this. So again, you're doing very well as a board if this is accurate, and only you know whether it's accurate. Your packages under your previous CAO were seen to be improved, just in terms of the quality and the ability to process the information. So that's certainly something that will be very helpful to your incoming CAO to know, as we change some things, let's make sure we're not, as I said at the outset, not changing the things that are well received by the board. So obviously all of the comments on this will go to the CAO as well, to make sure that they understand as it relates to staff support for the board. So moving on to the next. Role clarity. This is something that regional districts, the EA directors need different things from staff generally than municipal directors need, or a different level of support. And so, understanding how much how much time do electoral area directors get with staff? Like, what is the appropriate amount of time? And I am, one of the recommendations, sort of jumping ahead to the end, is I would love, as a part of this project, to be able to have a meeting with the EA directors around their unique governance needs just before we go to action, because the municipal directors do get more governance support through, and practice even through, their council meetings and that sort of thing. But just understanding a little bit about what governance supports EA directors. And I did speak with the chair about this prior, just about, because nobody wants another meeting, but just that opportunity, even via Zoom, to connect with the electoral area directors, I think would be helpful for the board to just make sure that if there are changes being made to procedures, bylaw committees, and that sort of thing, it's done with regard to the interests of those electoral area directors in particular. And this is not to segregate the board or divide it, but just that there's a bit of a different need there at times. This relates as well to that workload, is that, and some of this is decisions that electoral area directors make, but there's often more taken on their plates by electoral area directors to serve their areas. There's sort of this higher sense of opportunity, of obligation, for example. But that workload was municipal directors recognizing that some of their electoral area colleagues do spend more time on regional district matters than perhaps they do. So this was the language around that was very respectful by the municipal directors of the unique challenges of their electoral area colleagues. I see a hand gone up here.
Director Jones?
Thank you, Chair Rainbow. Do you think that's reflected in that 3.38 number? Another one I zoomed right in on, those different kinds of workloads. I really support your idea of meeting with just the EAD directors and talking a bit more about sort of how much staff support we need and how best to have that happen. I think that would be just terrific. So I'd go for that extra meeting.
Yeah, the bottom one there that you see, that 3.38, the tone of it was really a deep respect by the municipal directors for the fact that their EA director colleagues spend more time on board work, like just back in their home neighborhoods. I think there's comments about, there's probably more staff time being used, and just, understanding how that comes up in a couple of the other questions here, Director.
Thank you.
That's, but no acute problems here either.
If I could just comment on the meeting, I don't think it needs to be an extra meeting. I think we can look at having you come to one of our regular EAD committee meetings.
Absolutely, or even zooming in, whatever works best. It would be my pleasure if you felt that would be useful.
I think so. We had one today, it only lasted 30 minutes, and we rarely go more than, say, 2.5 hours. So, and we start at 10:30 in the morning. So we would be able to fit in a session with you quite easily.
Excellent. I would recommend that happen before we take any significant steps on. So assuming we could do that fairly quickly, just so that it doesn't slow this project down. We also do want to make sure that we're involving your new CAO in the steps as we move to talking about some of the internal processes. I wouldn't want to move too far on that until she's got her feet under her, just, so that she can put her stamp on some of this as well. So thank you.
So would the February meeting be appropriate? Is that waiting too long? Our new CAO starts mid-January. And our meeting, our first meeting after that would be the second Wednesday of February.
I would suggest then that we have this EA meeting, in January. I think keeping this moving, this was something that I know was identified as a priority in your strategic plan, and I would commit to looping her in that discussion if you were comfortable with that, or the chair and I, or whoever, we could loop her in if she wasn't available to drop in for that meeting.
Are you available on January the 10th?
Oh, look at you asking me a specific question.
You're on the spot right now.
I know. Look at just getting. Bear with me here. I'm just trying not to delete this meeting as I do that. January 10th is wide open.
Would you like to book us for that day then, and we'll sort of sort out the time later?
Let's make that an action that we've committed to.
Okay, very good. So Angela's made a note of that, so we're, okay, good. Thank
We've
you.
got a question here as well.
Where am I looking?
Director Stone.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see that, didn't I? Sorry, Director Stoner, go ahead.
All right, thank you. Through the chair, appreciate that offer, Tracy, and I think it's good. I do agree that there's general agreement around the board that the roles are different. I think one of the challenges that I've had as a municipal director is understanding what is an appropriate scope for the role of an EA director and the expectations. And so I think that would be something that would be helpful for me coming out of your discussion to better understand as a municipal director of like, not only what additional staff support is necessary, but what are, we've gone back and forth on this discussion. I've done it with EA directors too, of like, you have folks who come to you and ask you all kinds of things. And as the only person who is elected to that EA or to that electoral area, you feel responsible to respond.
Yes.
We do have similar examples in municipalities where people come to you as a counselor on all kinds of things. And it still, I don't think is appropriate for a counselor to respond. And so I think trying to help define that line for us would also be really helpful across the board.
Absolutely. How do electoral area directors meet those needs and manage expectations can certainly be a part of that. The other piece of it that I would suggest is that most regional districts, including yours in the comments, also struggle with municipal directors wanting to be respectful of matters that affect a local area specifically, but also not knowing how to discharge their fiduciary obligation as a regional district board member. And so I can share, you know, and even perhaps talk through with the electoral area directors. There's a number of policy questions that have helped other regional districts where there's sort of an agreement on the questions that will be asked as new matters come forward. You know, is it consistent with our strategic plan? Is it, you know, different communities will decide which those questions are, but it can really help to keep a regional district board connected when there is a board discussion about the types of questions we should be asking on any significant issue. And if everybody has those questions, even, you know, in East Kootenay, they even have them in front of them on their little blotter, the types of questions, because what's helpful for electoral area directors on that is that they know going in the question, they can tell a resident, these are the questions my colleagues are going to ask me. So if there is a request being made, it really is a tool that has been found to be very useful for electoral area directors as well, in terms of it, managing the expectations of residents about what, because I don't know for the EA members of this committee, people think that they can get anything done, you know, and paying for it is part of it, but not the only thing. And so just, I think there's some tools that we can perhaps discuss even at that EA group that would inform board decision making, because I think there's always that caution of not wanting to mow somebody else's lawn by weighing in too heavily in something that is in a specific area, but also knowing that as a regional district board member, you have an obligation to properly inquire. And so finding out how to do that in a respectful way is one of the biggest challenges I think of regional board decision making. So, you know, if it would be helpful, that's certainly one of my recommendations, is that this board explore that kind of a framework. It's just proven to be really helpful in other areas.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
I've got another question from Director Pettingill.
Yeah, thanks. And I just want to, I mean, sort of an area I don't understand well, and sort of one of the things I was hoping to discuss as part of this committee. When I looked at the Local Government Act, I don't actually see any difference in role between a municipal and an area director. How people are elected is different. But other than that, it seems to be the same role. I think we have delegated some additional responsibilities via the EAD committee to electoral area directors. But beyond what we've done there, and maybe that needs some clarification, just or maybe it's fine and I just need to understand it better. That seems to be the only place where there's actually any difference in role. And with some of the discussion, I wonder, is some of what we're doing, I mean, I've also seen our area directors just take on everything and do an enormous amount on behalf of their constituents. And I think just understanding though from I guess a governance perspective, what is the actual obligation, where are people going above and beyond, and what are the sort of well understood expectations from everyone. Just all of that I think will be really valuable. And I'm still a bit sort of unclear about all of those things right now.
Through the chair, may I answer?
Yes, please.
First of all, that's a very astute observation about what the legislation says, because the roles are the same. The expectations of the communities are profoundly different. And so they operate differently sort of on the supply side, the incoming expectations. And that's something that I would hope to have some time with the EA directors, just around some suggestions even about managing those expectations. And, how to make sure that basically that the expectations are aligned with what the regional district as a corporation is able to provide through that electoral area director to that area. And there are also in some regional districts models where if the residents want even higher level of service, if they want a staff person dedicated to them, there's problems with that as well. But there's ways to get more resources around things. But I think quite often, and your question touched on this, we focus on how do we do this? And I think there are some advantages in at least talking about, do people have an unreasonable expectation? I live in an electoral area, so I understand this as a resident, sort of looking at the, municipality, looking at Vernon and going, they got things I don't. Well, wait a minute, I chose, but managing those expectations, with the permission of the EA directors, there may be some suggestions I could provide to them in helping them on the front end, on the demand side versus the, supply side. But the roles are the same when a decision hits the table. It's about aligning the expectations of people and of the residents. Like, well, why is Tracy weighing in on this topic? She's from the, she's from the municipality. She doesn't even have to pay for it. People don't understand how complex this model is. So yes, you're right on the roles. Unless, of course, as you point out, you delegate those roles. Any
Thank
other
you.
questions?
Anybody else? Thank you.
Okay, next page then. Generally, first of all, high degree of alignment, sort of like, yeah, it's pretty good. On your strategic plan, I'm just pulling up the notes here that came up here. Bear with me here. I buried them with my expanded Zoom screen. One of the things that came up just with a couple of comments is there an opportunity now to look at your strategic plan, because there were comments about it being perhaps internally focused. And once your new CAO gets her feet under her, is there a benefit in looking a little bit broader about how your strategy aligns with like the regional growth strategy, for example? So just a bit of a fresh glance at that when you have a new CAO, to make sure also that you're not letting ad hoc items take over the ones that you did decide at strategic planning were your most important items. So, but again, in general, you're quite proud, particularly with the fact that you have lost a couple of months, with your talented CAO leaving, having a very competent person holding down the fort. But in general, the comments were that you as a region are feeling okay about where you're going in terms of strategic direction, even with things that would have pulled other organizations completely off track. I think there is just sort of also comments about, portions of what regional districts do are more tactical than strategic, but just being disciplined about staying the course on your strategic direction. Any comments there? Hey, next one. Look at us going fast here. Relationships. Again, you'll see some patterns here that also relate to communications. But in general, you're doing a really good job of interacting with each other. There's not, you're not a consultant's dream in terms of being a mess. You're doing hard work well. And one of the things that's really important as a regional district is your governance model is not an easy one to navigate. And just that reminder that if people are frustrated with the model, it doesn't seem like you're taking it out on each other as humans. I know you've had some difficult decisions which appear to have sort of highlighted a municipal EA divide, you know, around sort of sharing of resources and that sort of thing. But based on these results, it's not pulling you off the hard work of serving your region. You know, those things happen and it's hard. You know, this model is extraordinarily hard. But also just this notion of the one thing about this relationships, though, is just a reminder came up in the comments about the importance of connecting with the region as a whole, you know, with sort of cutting back on where meetings are held and that sort of thing. There can be an opportunity to connect more fully. And sometimes even, you know, there was a suggestion about the board, you know, going on the road a bit and seeing some of the areas that are being discussed. I don't know the extent to which that's practical, but just a notion of ensuring that all of the directors are staying connected to all of the community. Not a problem, but an opportunity for enhancement was the way that was raised in the survey. Just something to be aware of. And sometimes that can even be done through staff taking video of key areas so that the board can visualize, you know, without necessarily needing to drive to different areas, but also, please.
This last meeting we held in Lillooet, and the following day had a tour of Area A.
Oh, look at you guys go. There you go.
And we're talking in the spring of having a meeting down in Britannia Beach to look at the new development there.
Excellent.
So we're on board with that idea. It's something we've done in the past as well. So something that COVID got in the way of.
Well, I'm glad that you've restarted it. I was just with the regional district over the weekend that has not restarted it and is chafing against restarting that sort of thing. And while it feels sometimes like gestures as you're going on these longer drives, just a reminder that the director from that area is making that long drive to a more centralized area quite regularly. So I'm glad you're doing that. And I think that is it is respectful, but also just reminding you that staff, you know, taking their iPhones and videotaping key areas that you're discussing, quite often we can create a connection as well to the actual, you know, what's happening on the ground in contexts where we can't get out.
Yeah, I was going to say that it's well good for the directors to go somewhere else. It's quite easy for us actually, but it does take an enormous amount of staff time and extra effort to get that set up. So, you know, it's not something we want to be doing every month, for example.
No, you want to be disciplined about doing it. And good for you for being brave for doing it in November. The Duffy Lake Road is not my favorite road, as I ended up upside down in a ditch on it.
It's no problem. No problem.
But again, this is really good data. And if you would like, it would be my pleasure to walk your new CAO through this as she starts, just to be able to onboard her to what I've learned, because she's joining a board that is in very good shape compared to other regional districts I work with. And you should be very proud of yourselves just for her to know that being this positive with losing Craig and having gaps and that sort of thing is something you should be very proud of. There will always be parts of your region that will feel that they're not getting the level of attention. And in regional district, that's a bit of a math problem at the end of the day. You know, just it's hard with the diversity of a region like yours to hit every target at once. But as far as doing it, you know, what you're doing is working very well according to the board. Now, remember, these are only the board's answers. So there's the next piece of work is talking with the management team about their perspectives on this, you know, on some of these things, but this is the board's lens on it. So the next one. Oh, please.
The comment you just made about our new CAO and Chair Ford is here, so she heard that, and I'll talk to her about that afterwards.
Excellent. I am so impressed by your new CAO's credentials. I just think that's going to be such an exciting hire for you as a regional district.
Yeah, that's what we think.
So this is interesting, and I say this because I was just with a municipal group that rated themselves individually 2 full points higher than they rated the group. So I'm not sure who was dragging the ratio down, but they didn't see any of them. All of you think that the group, you rated collectively the group higher than yourselves as individuals. And that's just something that I think is we want to see that kind of synergy and humility, candidly, where people are sort of looking at themselves. And a number of the comments were really reflective of good governance in terms of people noting what they could do better versus sort of pointing fingers at what other people could do better. And I don't always see that level of self-awareness on these surveys. So I think that notion of individual directors looking at how they can contribute to governance as human beings is a positive. But this is, this is a nice thing to see that generally the group, and this 7.6, I don't think I've seen with a regional district. Like, this is focusing on governance while things are going well, does give you an opportunity to make changes without, this is not a dysfunctional board. This is a highly functional board looking to make governance improvements. And I think that's something in 2023 that is something to be extraordinarily proud of, because this is not easy at this time. So I'm not sure if we have the slide, the final sort of weighing. I know in the report we had sort of the chart. Is this the final slide, or do we have one more here? Okay, so this is just another way of presenting exactly the same data, and just reminds you of the individual questions that were answered, highest to lowest, but your lowest would be, the midpoint on some of these ones that I do. And this wasn't just people dialing it in. There were reasoned and thoughtful comments given by directors on each of these areas. So anyways, this is just another way of presenting the same data for your records. And if you go to the next one, we're getting down to the lower ones, but still very high. So my recommendations are, in terms of next steps, if we could have that, so I'm done with this report for whomever is running our presentation. Thank you very much for that. I don't know if any of you are of an age where you read your children books that had the ding and you turned the page in the book. Does anybody know what I'm talking? Some of you are going to pretend you do, but you're too young to know. But so thank you for your help with the presentation. The next step being that EA meeting, and this is not, I want to be very clear. I'm always cautious about subsetting off EA directors and municipal directors, because what we don't want to do is in any way create or reinforce a divide. But I do believe there are different enough interests that in this case, it would be beneficial to have that governance discussion with the electoral area directors, partly because the municipal directors just have more governance-y type practice, whether it's meetings or an even extra series of orientations that are gone through at the municipal level, and an opportunity to make sure that the governance changes are not just about how the regional district does business, but also just tips for the electoral areas getting better. And a number of electoral area directors were in the comments just so humble. Just, I would love any suggestions on how I can get better. And that level of humility isn't something that I see in all the groups that I operate. But just to be clear, this is not a remedial session for the electoral area directors to bring them up to the level. It's an opportunity for their unique voice to be heard. And I want to be really clear on that is not what it is. It's not a catch up. It's an opportunity to see whether there's any common interests in terms of how governance can support the work that's being done, particularly in the rural areas for that. I do think that talking with your CAO and management staff, taking a look at your procedures bylaw and your delegation bylaws, there were comments that there may be work that management can do that's taking board time, and just taking a look at some of the past few meetings and those opportunities. That policy framework, I would recommend you take a look at. And with this committee's permission, I would suggest it go through this committee before it goes to the board as a whole, but that it be a discussion at the board, not a decision by this committee, just so that you are talking about the types of factors that you will consider in making decisions. That framework can also be very helpful for management preparing reports. If they know what your policy questions are as a board, they can make sure that they're preparing those in advance. And again, I can provide you with a list of, 12 or 13 different ones that different regional districts use. And you can sort of say what matters most to us in the SLRD around our decision making. And then just, again, your meetings are going very well. There were some nice comments about your chair and the way that the meetings are going, but the breaks is a small, it sounds tactical, but it can help humans that are, we don't get better when we're frustrated. And we also, I don't know if it happens at the SLRD, this is my observation, not something that came through the survey, but we start to get squeaky with people sort of turning off their cameras or leaving the meetings. If we don't take enough breaks, we're losing people ad hoc. So through to the chair of the board and chairs of committees, just being aware that on Zoom as well, we're taking those breaks. I'm just looking at this on the strategy refresh, no specific recommendations around that, but just an opportunity perhaps to, maybe now that you've got a year under your belt, put that wide angle lens of the regional growth strategy and see whether it aligns with what you're doing. But the board was really clear about understanding that staff capacity is always an issue and that it's not a letter to Santa, on a strategy refresh where you just start putting more projects in. Anyways, that is my observation through this survey. And next steps are obviously the purview of this committee. Those are just my recommendations.
Thank you. Director Stoner?
Thank you, through the chair. Can you just speak a little bit more? Appreciate the intent around the EA meeting, but I'm curious about how we then circle back to this committee in terms of what comes out of that. Again, kind of trying to create that shared knowledge and understanding of what that role is amongst all board members.
I think you've actually nailed it in your question, is just that meeting would have a report back through this committee in terms of, at the high level, what was discussed and whether there were any unique recommendations, because of course those have to be endorsed through this committee, not be direction, per se. But if there were unique, and there's a couple of questions that and maybe even just, running the questions or the agenda for that through this committee might be helpful. But I didn't get a sense that people were nervous about that. But I would suggest that before it go to the board proper, just an update at least to this committee, so that this committee remains the group that knows the most about this very important work that's going on. Does that answer your question? Just, it really is not, to be candid, it's just something that I thought might be beneficial. And then we'll see whether anything substantive comes out of it or otherwise. But I wouldn't want to go through this exercise and miss an opportunity to capture those voices in maybe a little bit of a more organized way. And it's not to minimize the municipal voice in any fashion, but just to make sure that unique governance piece, just that we have that opportunity.
Yeah, totally. I think it's a great suggestion, and I think it'll be very valuable. I just want to make sure that we all get the learnings out of it at the end of the day. And that sounds like a great process to get there.
And I think that's a really important one, because what we don't want to do is send the message to the board proper that somehow we're subsetting the groups off, or that, this, I think how that gets messaged, is something this committee just might want to be aware of, so that it doesn't look like this is being taken over by, or vice versa. Just the intention is just to make sure that if you're going to go through a process of changing things, that everybody feels like they've got an opportunity, with maybe, a little bit of, facilitation, to make sure that the recommendations, including the recommendation that was raised earlier about managing the expectations in the communities, because it just seems like more and more is being expected of EA directors. And there are some governance suggestions that might help individual EA directors, we're talking about governance with a capital G, but it just seems like those expectations are amping up. And I expect through the fire season, you saw a lot of that, just about. So I'll leave that to you all to message, but the intention is not to, have a union meeting, where it's quite the opposite, just an organization of interests to see if those voices align.
That's very good.
Yeah, and just on this point, I'm trying to remember to look at the owl this time.
Hello.
And sort of building on this a little bit, to my mind, there's some other discussions that we, or at least I have, pinned to some of this sort of better understanding of roles and so on. And that's, we've put a remuneration discussion to this, especially around EAD director remuneration, which I think is tied to roles, but also sort of bundled in with that. And, speaking about fires and so on, if we're going to have greater pressures, is there a staffing resourcing discussion? So just the reason I'm asking or flagging this is what I've sort of been hearing is that the EAD directors will have a discussion. It might come back here and then it'll go to the board. And I guess I'm just sort of trying to wrap my head around. So these other things, which I think are related and important, is that sort of coming after a board discussion, do you think? Or is that that's just this whole ball of wax we have to figure out and prioritize all the things, and there'll just be a constant back and forth with the board and so on?
Through the chair, if there are other matters, because remuneration wasn't something that I have stepped into on this, but if there are other matters, candidly, if there's any other topics that you'd like, sort of moved into this, particularly if they relate to the electoral area directors, we certainly, if they can be flagged in advance, let's try to not make this pickleball to the extent we can, where we're bouncing back and forth on this. I do, important changes will want to be iterative, but if there are other topics that this committee thinks might benefit from a more focused EA view on it, that might be a good place to put it. I'm not sure if I'm fully understanding though, because I have not touched on remuneration, and it did come up as one comment in the survey, but I wasn't quite clear on whether if there's anything I can do to help with facilitating, even the data around that, or sort of perceptions around that. But I would appreciate more clarity, because we may be able to take it to the first meeting. If this committee has a sense that there's another topic, for having a meeting anyways, and there's a facilitator there, you might want to figure out if there's other topics that this committee at the policy level might want facilitated. You're already paying me, you may as well make me do as much as,
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I guess what I'm just trying to wrap my head around is, again, in my mind, the first sort of piece for me to understanding is what are the roles that we can all understand. And then a lot of these other decisions will fall from that. I guess I'm just sort of trying to understand is, from your perspective, how or when do we get to those next things, which we have flagged as quite important, and just sort of understanding, and maybe it is we try and deal with it from the EAD perspective on the first meeting, get those perspectives, or maybe there's a bit of an iteration there. I'm not really sure. I guess I'm just sort of wanting to flag. I think there are, from my perspective, some quite important dependent things on that roles discussion.
I think on the roles discussion, if I may, through the chair, apologies for jumping in here. If there are other topics that impact roles, because remuneration is a bit of it's a circular discussion. The more you do, the more, compensation is, okay. But you can either limit the amount of, like, why are we doing all these things, these extra things? Or the more that we've got all of the factors in a major conversation, the easier it is to have it. If remuneration was changed, would the workload, I don't understand the remuneration question, just to be clear, it's not been part of what I've been privy to. But if this committee would find a benefit in that being rolled in, I will await instruction from the chair as to whether that would be useful. So however it serves you best, but I will suggest that as much as this governance project is one of your strategic priorities, you are doing very well. We are talking about improvements, but not fixing a broken system. But I also would suggest you don't want this dragging on too long because you've got other things as well on your priorities. So whatever this committee thinks is the most expeditious way. And also, I guess that, in modeling the very behaviors we're talking about, there may be some value in this committee talking about, do you need to go back to the board? Or does the board just get a final report from this committee at the end of all of this? Very much like we're talking about is, what is the authority for this project delegated to this board, to this committee, pardon me. Do we, and from my perspective as a consultant, when do you want to take this to your board as a recommendation? When do you want the staff work of reviewing or even identifying the next steps on this? That's something that, after I finish hearing, if you've talked about it, or even through the chair identifying, is it February where we want to actually have, what the next steps are in the work plan for sort of the next phase of this, of making some of these changes. And I'm not trying to put you on the spot in asking that. I'm just saying that this committee might want to just have a discussion about where in your board calendar does getting this resolved fit. And also with your new CAO, I am not recommending a wholesale rewrite of your internal governance processes right now, period. I would suggest you start with your procedures bylaw and look at that and identify ways to clean up things that don't have a high perceived impact on the board. The one thing that's really important through an exercise like this is not to put more rules in place without removing at least as many rules and trying. The other piece that this committee is going to have to do is assess whether you want to have a trust-based procedures bylaw with more delegation. Do you have confidence in your staff? Because there are many things that hit board and council agendas that are technical in nature and can be delegated. And I haven't looked at all of your policies, but it would be helpful if this committee, had a sense for your CAO or the board for your CAO of that level of delegation that you believe that the board is comfortable with. And, the best way to do it is to highlight 2 or 3 of the things that you feel like you spent time on that you didn't need to. Sometimes we know the need to delegate because of we feel the pain of the absence of that delegation. And I think the real question for you as a board is at the end of your meetings, was this the highest and best use of this many people's time? Did we talk about the most important issues as a matter of importance? And it does seem like your meetings are, you seem to be having very good meetings. So we're talking about what's the opportunity for improvement while you're having good meetings, because this is just like anything else. You do not want to wait till this is broken to tighten it up. Anyways, I will take my leave here. I will plan on that January meeting with the electoral area directors, and I'll connect with the chair after this meeting and after you've had a chance to discuss, and maybe if we can lay out sort of what is the calendar to wrap this first phase up and move into the next stage of management making some of those changes.
Great.
Okay.
Get it, just hang on a minute. That's good.
Well,
Okay.
again, you should be extraordinarily proud of your board colleagues. And I would suggest that even while this works its way through, it's never a bad idea for just a brief update, even on this report, reminding your board that compared to other, organizations, you're doing very well and have an opportunity to improve even further your governance. But even though this hit your strategic plan, compared to others, you're doing really, really well. And let's build on that strength.
Oh, thank you very much. For those
Okay,
kind words.
thank you so much for having me, and we'll be in touch, Chair Rainbow. Okay,
Okay, thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now. We need a break.
We do.
I made a note there, so could I have a break? Right. 2 minutes, 3 minutes, what do you want? 2 minutes. Just, oh. Meeting
We're going for
recess.
5?
I'm leaving for 5.
We're live now? Okay, very good. So I'll call this meeting back to order, and we're on item 5.2, direction request, directors remuneration review. Can I make I'd like to make a comment before we get any further into this. This thing has grown like topsy. It started as what I thought was a relatively straightforward request. And there's a concept behind it, which I don't think we seem to be covering now. We're looking at, I'm not saying these things shouldn't be looked at the elements of remuneration, and we want to look at what are other people getting in other places and things like that. And quite frankly, I wasn't interested in any of that. I was simply interested in the concept that it's really difficult to attract people to run for office in electoral areas at the level we're paying right now. It's supposedly a part-time job, and to do it, as a part-time job, somebody that's already working doing a part-time job would have to give that up to do this, and we don't pay enough to want people to do that. And the idea stemmed from the frustration I had at the end of last term trying to find someone to run for electoral area D, and you're really limited to people who are retired, like the 4 current electoral area directors, or somebody that maybe has a really good business that they can have somebody else run for them or spend a lot of time on. And again, that's going to be an older person. And there are some really good younger people around, people in their 30s and 40s who just cannot afford to do this job. And that's really where I'm coming from. I don't care what any other regional district is doing. I don't care what they're paying. I think we need to raise the level of the remuneration for electoral area directors so that you just widen the pool that we can choose from. And for me, any discussion here, that has to be the sort of the number one thing. So I just wanted to say that first, and it was me that originally brought this to the board. So having said that, Monica, unless anybody has a comment or question, turn to Pennigan.
Yeah, just sort of offer a comment, and I appreciate that. I would suggest, though, it's actually a fairly similar situation for municipal directors, and I'm giving up, I guess 20 days of vacation, personal vacation. I'm doing this full-time job and my council job, and it's a lot, and it's not a lot of money, and I think struggling. So it's a very similar situation. And so that's for me why I sort of really want to understand the roles and have a bit of a broader discussion about actually do all the remuneration need to go up, or can it, and what does that look like? Or maybe there are reasons where there actually are some fundamentally different things in the EAD role or our expectations that really mean we do need to prioritize just those roles now. And so I'm not sort of clear on all those pieces yet, and I wanted to kind of understand those.
Yeah, maybe we should put everybody's, I don't know, but as I say, I do know that the rate of pay that we offer at the moment for electoral areas, it's nowhere near enough to attract people that don't have another source of income, a substantial source of income. So
I think that's why there's value in understanding this role is the expectation from the legislation is this number of hours per week. And I know you can't necessarily quantify how many hours it takes to answer emails. But if and then also to be able to report out to the community that this is the expectation that the community can reasonably expect of the time it takes to do the work.
Because oftentimes you'll see directors, not picking on anyone in our team, but feeling like they have to do everything and solve everything for everyone. And that could take way more than 40 hours a week. And so reporting that back to the community to say, this is not my full-time job, right? We've talked to people who were interested in the past who had other jobs. And it's reasonable to say I have this many hours allotted of my life to this work. And this is how much my time is worth. And I think that that's important for any person who's doing any kind of work to understand what their time is worth and what the organization reasonably can expect from a director. And then there's probably, anyhow, so I think that it's certainly an important conversation for all of the reasons you've listed. But then on the flip side of that, understanding how we do what we do and the tools that are required by an area director, the resources that are required, the training that is required. Are we setting ourselves up? Are we setting up the next board for success so that they have the tools and the understanding of what is expected of them to do the work well? And then also that we can properly resource our budget so that we can pay the salaries that are required to attract the people to do the work.
Thank you. I should welcome Monica at this point.
Yeah,
And,
thank
take
you.
us through this, Monica.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for those comments. It's appreciated. I did jot down a couple notes. So I'm Monica Halitsky, HR manager at the SLRE, joining you virtually for item 5.2. So this staff report is in follow-up to previous directors' reports that were brought to the board regarding remuneration for SLRD electoral area directors. In those previous reports, it was identified that current remuneration levels are a barrier to attracting capable people to run for election as an SLRD regional district electoral area director. So this topic did make its way to the staff corporate work plan. So the intention for this report is really to just put some additional information in front of you, initiate some further reflection on the topic, and ultimately get some direction from the board or this committee on next steps. The report presents some comparable data as was requested at a past meeting and on this topic. And the report also provides some additional UBCM information and guidance relevant to directors' remuneration. So essentially, staff is seeking direction on the increases to EA directors' remuneration as was presented at the April 2023 board meeting, but also looking for feedback and direction on whether a wider directors' remuneration review is appropriate prior to the election in 2026. So I trust that there may be some further discussion and questions, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Director Pettigill?
Yeah, and I apologize, I can't remember the report, but did you, in your research about other regions, come across, like, are other regions evaluating actively and having similar discussions? Do you know? Because I think to the points that have been raised, it's really hard for people in these roles to survive anywhere in BC on those salaries, and so you need a second job, but then to find a job that is flexible enough. And so I presume we're not the only region that's having this challenge. Do we know how other regions are tackling this, or are they just sort of it's not raising to that level yet and we'd be the first ones?
Yeah, through the chair, I think this is always a topic at other local governments, regional districts specifically. Each regional district has a director's remuneration bylaw. Some bylaws specify that it's in the bylaw that it gets reviewed on a regular basis. For example, once per term. Others, the majority of others actually don't specify that, but the research that staff have done so far hasn't been that in depth. And I'm not sure whether or not, what other regional districts have in place. Do they have job profile or role profiles or terms of reference in place? Are they using that as a baseline to determine remuneration? That may be something that would need to be explored further. But it is, staff know that other regional districts, this is a hot topic at other regional districts, and it gets reviewed on a regular frequency. Not sure if that answered your question.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Ms. Stoner?
Thank you. This is actually a question for you, Chair. Based on your initial director's report, I'm curious what the rationale was for phasing in the increase over 3 years as opposed to doing a review in advance of the next election.
Okay, first of all, I brought this forward in the last term with the idea of getting it approved before the end of the term. And I certainly, I didn't have any intention to run at that time. So when we brought it back again at the beginning of this term, we thought two things. The first thing is that this is not sort of a self-interest thing that I want a big raise. And so if we wanted to leave it until the end of the term and do it all in one chunk, that's fine with me. The reason to spread it out over, initially it was going to be 4 years, $5,000 a year over 4 years, but we missed last budget cycle. And so we're into this little pattern we've got here of 5, 5, and 10. And the idea was to ease it into the taxes and not to dump it all in 1 year. So that, did that answer your question?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks for the context. So just some general comments, I think, on where I'm sitting on this particular file. I think that for me, there is still some more fulsome context and understanding that needs to be brought forward, in particular, the discussion that we just had around the governance excellence work and the better defining and understanding the roles around the board table would be really helpful for me to better inform this discussion. I hear loud and clear the need to better reflect how we get more people attracted to these roles. I think that goes more broadly across local government. And so I think that needs to be, it's not just, part of it is definitely remuneration, but there's other components that make these roles difficult or easier to fill. So we all know that retention and recruitment remuneration is one part of it, but there's other components to making these roles more accessible. And so I think that deserves a broader conversation. I do think it should be for all roles around the board, not just the EA director roles. To me, the piece that stood out the most in the chart is actually what we're providing remuneration for the chair and the vice chair role is really out of step with other regional districts. I think a lot of us understand the amount of work that goes into those roles. So for me, anything that stood out in terms of immediate change would maybe be those two roles. But I would feel more comfortable doing a broader remuneration review for the board in line with the next local election. My 2 cents.
Thank you. Can I just respond to that? I would agree with what you just said, and it's not out of line with sort of my general thinking going into this. And the one thing I do think we need to, how do I want to say this? I didn't want to talk about a 2% increase or something like this. I wanted to pick a big number that would really kind of get people's attention, and that seems to have done that. And if we want to talk about it in broader terms, then I'm fine with that. The only thing that I would want to see is that we get some sort of decision before the end of this term. If it takes a little bit longer than I would have liked it to have taken, that's fine. But I don't want it just sloughed off and we end up making no decision. I'd like something that, never mind the end of the term, by the end of, say, three years in this term, so it gives us almost 2 years. Because that last year, I really want to be working hard to find people that will run as an elector, as a candidate for the EA director for Area D. And I want to have something in place that's going to make it easier for me to do that. And as I say, broaden the field. At the moment, I'm pretty restricted who I can reasonably approach. That's bigger.
Yeah, thanks. Slightly tangential, but I think it's important. I'm just, if someone can remind me how long we have Tracy for, how long we're at this point planning to engage Tracy.
Oh, good question.
We've signed a contract this is step one, is what she's doing right now. And that's sort of the end of what needs to be completed. And if you look at 5.3, we sort of talk about next steps. And so there are a number of items. Tracy did bring up some that we can get into later, but then we can also decide what would be the priority, what the funding is, who we get to do that. I think those are the next steps conversation that we can definitely add. So right now, the survey and sort of that maybe EAD meeting report back and maybe something to the board to sort of wrap up this first contract with them.
Okay, thank you. And just to Director Rainbow's point, I don't think we want this discussion to go for another term. And so making sure that, because it feels like we've been sort of delayed, and I understand why on this committee a bit. And so sort of eager to start knocking some of these things off and get a clear plan. So it's good if we'll have Tracy there to help push us along a little bit.
Good. Thanks for.
I think it would be useful or productive for each of us, area directors as well as municipal directors, to reflect personally on the time that we take to do the work that we do. And it could be, on the back of a napkin, I do 5 hours this week and I do 10 hours next week. And perhaps I do this extra work for the committees, and just take a snapshot of the kinds of work we do. We all do our meeting prep, getting ready for a board meeting, but what else do we do outside of that? And it'll be significantly different for yourself as it is for Director Birch Jones, as it is for Director Demare.
Yep.
And so, not to say I do my job this way and therefore it's the right way, but more to say just a kind of a back of the napkin audit of how many hours you spend and how many hours I spend and how many hours you spend, so that we have an idea of what we think the role requires. And then maybe we feed that into some kind of a survey of something that I'm sure Tracy would happily orchestrate for us, or not to create work, but to quantify the work that we do, so that when we have the conversation about $50,000 or $35,000, we can put a number to it. But more interesting, in my opinion, is that when you go to resident in Paradise Valley and say, are you interested in running for electoral area director? This is how many hours it takes me to do this work. But if you talk to my friend up in Area C, their job is very different. And just because even Area D, SLRD to Area D, TNRD, to, you know what I mean? Like, those jobs are vastly different. And so there is no framework that, which is why our remuneration is different in every region, because, and not to say that we're trying to compare other regions, but I think that, there are places they're only paying the mayor of a town $14,000 for the year. And that's all the mayor can, and so that's a fundamental disconnect potentially for a person to take on the responsibility of a mayor of a small town.
Yeah.
Versus, $120,000 for a mayor in another town of a different size and scope and everything. So I just think that it would be interesting to inform this conversation not that we're trying to cut it down to an hourly wage or anything like that, but just to create a story of why this is important.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good idea. I think, and while you was talking there, I was thinking of my previous profession, and if you ask how many hours a week does a teacher work,
Yeah.
how do you quantify that? You can't, it's impossible. You've got some that maybe put in 85 hours, and others that put in 35, you know, it's all over the place. And it's similar. And yeah, when I look at Vivian's area compared to mine, and yeah, you're right, they're all 4 of our areas are very different.
Yeah.
You know, I look at mine, I've got I think it's 7 different community associations that all want to have me show up occasionally. Sal's got that Brevka plus the Braylon thing, and Vivian's got a really close relationship with Lillooet, and spending a lot of time in Lillooet and times and in Area B, and Russell will area C again with Peeves and the demands. I don't know how often he meets, but it seems almost every week, is it? It seems like that. Oh, is it only once a month? Yeah.
But there are different
Yeah.
expenditures that he's responsible for that you don't have, and
So it's very difficult to compare in that way. Again, I was just, I'm quite happy to do that, to make some lists, and I think I'll get my wife to do it. She'll be more accurate than me. But again, I was just looking at the problem. I'd get to a certain point in a conversation and somebody would say, oh, I can't afford it.
Yeah.
We got to get past that.
Yeah.
So,
Viv's got her hand up.
oh, who does?
Viv.
I'm sorry. And Chris did as well. Looks like Viv and then Chris.
Thank you. I just, I have spent quite a bit of time trying to think about actually how much time does this job require? And I think Area B is a relatively light assignment as far as electoral areas go. Ian would say I work full time, right? And there's no, and weekends and evenings too, but that is not true. It is more like a really solid part-time job. And I quite enjoy it, and I quite enjoy the amount of work that I do. I am also pretty damn good at saying no to a lot of things. A lot of that is based on my experience and years. You know, I could be running all day, every day, if I was responding to all the requests. But the thing that gets you is the unpredictable nature of the schedule, I think. That chamber meeting, that yes, and you know, the conversations, the calls that come from constituents, and I'm fine not taking all the calls or taking, you know, leaving things to go to voicemail. I don't feel like I need to be on email all the time, but I'm pretty responsible, and I put in a good, more than a solid part-time commitment to this. And that's with not doing a lot of things that I could do, but I feel that I do enough. So it's the unpredictable. Like if I think about trying to hold another part-time job down, I can manage a German Shepherd, but I don't know about, you know, a child, forget it. Like even trying to help my niece with her kids and having hockey and so forth, that really stretches me when I'm trying to fit her kids in around my schedule. And I think, yeah, what would this be like for a mom? This is a tough one. And I want moms to be able to participate, even dads. I should be careful about that. But one thing I did do was I read, first of all, Monica, this was an outstanding report that you did for us, but it wasn't until I got to the very, very end of the UBCM report on best practices summary. I don't know if everybody read that, but I was sort of making notes of that. And then I went, oh my God, it's all laid out right here in 3 pages in that best practices summary. And I thought that would be a really easy thing for us to look over and go, yeah, we're doing that well. We're doing that. That's a good idea. And most of them, I think, sort of along the lines of what Tracy was saying, we're doing quite well. A couple of small things came up to when I got to the end, I went to meal rates. I think the meal rates aren't very good. I don't think they're very close to what you actually pay when you're on the road. And I don't know that much about the extended health, dental, vision, and insurance. Can I just ask that question? Do we offer that to our board members? I don't know because I didn't need them. So I just said no right off the bat if it was even offered. So Monica, I'm sure you know if we offer that to board members.
Yeah, through the chair, we do, and it
Yeah.
is outlined in the remuneration bylaw.
Okay. All right. So I think just that little speech is just my comment on the amount of time and that the part that I think is most challenging for people to juggle is doing this part-time job, but the somewhat unpredictable nature of some of the hours that are required and some of the overnight meetings where you should be away, and that's an extra ask for people. And yeah, I'll stop.
Thank you. Mr. Pettingham.
Yeah, just sort of building on Director Stoner's comment from earlier and Director Ford's comment as well. Understanding not just the time, but some of the other needs, like as municipal directors, we have access to a laptop and a mobile device. I'm not sure if area directors get that or not. But and also is a 4x4 a practical requirement to be an area director. You know, I know we have mileage and stuff, but you know, are there things like this that you know, someone actually can only run if they have a 4x4 of their own, and so that's an actual unseen barrier. So just sort of understanding some of these things would be, I think, helpful to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've always had myself, not really thought about that, but you're right. There's a consideration. So where do we want to go with this? What do we want to do? This is a request for direction.
Can I test a motion, Chair?
Please do.
So my first motion would be that we direct staff to pursue a broader review of the remuneration bylaw for all directors in time for the 2026 budget.
In advance of the next election, so that it's
Right.
approved before the 2026 year starts.
Yeah.
I'll support that motion.
Okay, so could you just say it again, Jenna, so make sure we've got it down right?
Yeah, that we direct staff to pursue a review of the remuneration bylaw for all directors in time for the 2026 budget.
Jenna, can I
Second.
just suggest 2025 to give that anticipatory year that Director Rainbow's talking about for us to do some recruiting?
Well, we would talk about this in fall of 25 for the 26 year, and the election is at the end of 26.
November.
So that would work.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that works within you. So seconded by Dr. Ford.
Just does this procedural, does this need to be a recommendation that the board direct staff?
Recommendation.
I think so,
Yeah.
yeah. So have we got that wording? We have.
So it's number 2 as laid out in the package. That the board confirm a wider director's remuneration review as appropriate and provide direction on the scope.
I've lost the page now.
It's page 20 of the 23-page package.
Yeah.
There was a,
Oh, there it is. There it
yeah.
is. Yeah, so that. Are you suggesting that wording?
I think that's what.
Are you okay with that, Director Stoner? With that, the wording in
And then
number-
just add in the
number
year.
2?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
For
With
budget
the-
consideration for.
2026 budget.
Yeah. Okay, so that's moved, seconded. Any other discussion? Oh, sorry, Monica.
Yes, Chair, I just had a question about the comment that was made previously, or discussion around the EA, or all of the directors capturing what what's involved in their roles, maybe doing a bit of a survey. Is that process still wanting to be incorporated into this review, or through the separate governance piece with Tracy, or in conjunction with each other?
I don't think they're necessarily in conjunction, but I could see that happening, and then the result coming to you to assist you in the work you're doing for this particular motion. Dr. Stone?
Yeah, I was just gonna say something similar through the chair. I think that kind of like back the envelope calculation can happen and inform the discussion that Tracy will be having on the governance piece with the EA directors, and our broader conversation of having a better understanding of the scope of the various roles around the table. And then hopefully that will help inform this next piece of work around a broader remuneration bylaw review. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Yes, thank you.
So I call the question on the motion. All in favour? Opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you. Did you say you had a second motion, Dr. Stone?
Yeah, I'm curious about testing a second motion, so I'll put on the floor and see what colleagues think. And it would be that this committee refer to the 2024 budget, that the chair and vice chair annual remunerations be brought up to the median percentile as outlined in the staff report.
I should probably recuse myself from this discussion.
You don't, well, sorry, if you feel like you have to, you can, but you technically don't have to because it could apply to anybody. I went through this process when we brought in the maternity leave policy.
Okay,
And so because it's a broader policy decision that is not necessarily specifically, although you hold that seat currently, it's not only a decision that will affect you, it'll affect others in the future. But if you feel uncomfortable with it, you can also recuse yourself. That's cool.
So you're suggesting a motion that where we would consider that this year for next year's budget?
We'd consider it for the upcoming budget, the 2020
Yes.
budget.
I'm gonna, sorry, Chair, I'm gonna declare a conflict or a perceived bias for participating in this conversation, given that I was just elected to the chair. So I feel like that's not appropriate for me to have this conversation.
Okay,
So I'll step up.
okay.
And I probably should too. Does that still leave a quorum?
How many do we need for quorum?
Three.
Yeah.
Three.
We're okay. We're okay, Vivian, if she's gone, right? Okay. Do you have a comment?
We're just referring it to the budget? Yeah, so that makes sense to me to have a look at it. I think I do have some questions, but to sort of have that discussion as a group, I think makes sense. And we're not approving it here, so.
Yeah. So again, my comment would be, and I spent 2 years as chair, and the amount of extra work you do as chair is not reflected by that $14,000. And again, it didn't bother me too much because I've got a very comfortable pension, and I'm not in, I don't need to have extra money. But I think it should be more. One based on the work and recognition of the work that the chair does and the vice chair. And we shouldn't be at half the provincial average. That's just not fair. So I'm very much in favour of this. Do we want to say anything else, Jenna?
No, I think that speaks for itself. Those are the two areas that really jumped out at me in the staff report table that I do think are grossly underpaid and really the two biggest roles within this board. And so I think that this is appropriate to bring forward to the board for a broader discussion in the upcoming budget.
Great, okay, so with that, I should call the question. All in favor? Opposed? No one? Motion carries. Unanimously. Hello?
Thanks for your work, Monica. That was a really great report.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon. Bye.
Did Monica go? Oh, right, okay. So we're now, where are we at now?
5.3.
Governance section.
These are coming. These two can probably go together.
They could, couldn't they? Yeah, why not? We're gonna do 5. Oh, let's wait till Vivian gets back. Oh, fine. Okay. Okay, so we're going to look at 5.3 and 5.4 together because they belong together. So
We should perhaps, we can get Angela to just do a bit of an overview of this report.
that would be very good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Angela Belsham,
We should talk
Director.
about that beforehand.
Good afternoon, Angela Belsham, Director of Legislative and Corporate Services. So the report in front of you is just to provide some information on possible items that the committee may want to consider as part of their next steps discussion. While the report doesn't provide an exhaustive list of all of the different things that they could look at, it certainly touches upon a number of items that the Tracy Lawrence and the consultant brought up. It also outlines a few resolutions that have been made by the board for this policy development and review committee to consider as they start doing their work. So 2 items that had been referred to the policy committee was a more detailed review of the board code of conduct, as well as the director's remuneration review, which we saw. And then the other items are items that have been captured as part of conversations at the board level, as well as conversations with past CAOs. So hoping that this can sort of help with that next steps discussion at 5.4.
Great, thank you. I think the director's remuneration, we've dealt with that. I think it's, we didn't spend any more time on that. That's proceeding. So we're looking at the code of conduct, which was referred to us back in February 23. And then these other items. Now, where are the ones that Tracy suggested? We've got those as well, haven't we? Okay, so comments. I've got one that I would really like to see as a #1 priority, and that is delegated authority to electoral area directors and Peeves Committee. And my reasoning there is there are a number of things right now that when they're discussed at those committees have to come as recommendations to the board. And when they come as recommendations to the board, they just go straight through, you know. I think we could just as they delegate the authority to the committee. The information comes to the board as part of the consent agenda. And if somebody on board has a question, or then they can put it out and then they can discuss it at that level. And I think the board has the power by resolution to make a change if they felt that what was needed. So I would like to see that as, I think what that does is it saves time at the board table, and it just makes, I'll leave it at that. It does. I'll give you an example of one if you like. And then, select funds. We have select funds allocated to our areas, and the authority is delegated to the EAD committee to make decisions about select funds. So if I want to give $5,000 to the fire department, I go to the EAD committee. It's discussed, voted on, approved or not approved. Approved, it goes, the money goes. That's it. Amenities funds, which are specifically for the electoral areas, can't be spent anywhere else. That goes to EAD committee, and then we have to make a recommendation to the board. Why? What's the difference really between those two things? So just give us the authority to disperse the amenities funds as well. That's an example. I'm sorry. No, the CEO. You're sitting too close to me. You see, I can't see you around there. Yeah.
So I agree definitely to make the board meetings more efficient, that there could be a consideration of delegated authority to not only PVIS and the EAD meeting. One thing I would say from sort of a staff perspective on trying to figure out what steps to sort of put in place in order to get to those points. And I think, you know, number one, and Tracy mentioned this as well, the procedure bylaw is sort of your guiding how you're going to do everything. And I think that time would be well spent if that was the number one priority, because then you can make things more efficient through that practice. And then from there, you're considering what those committees look like, because none of them have terms of reference. And you don't want to have your terms of reference developed without having your procedure bylaw the way you want it in order to operate. Because right now, it just kind of operates. There's no consistency. Even this committee, it doesn't have a terms of reference. It has a draft, but it doesn't say how you're going to conduct the meeting. And I think that also improves the efficiency. And then as a result of that, then you can consider of these committees, what are the roles and what is the delegated authority that these committees have, because they're all going to be somewhat different.
EAD doesn't have delegated authority.
It has
Doesn't have terms of reference.
I don't think any of the committees,
No?
no committee has a term of reference.
How do we know that we can do that and can't do other things then? Well, that must be.
That's a challenge
Oh.
for staff to understand, to go back
Yeah.
and to try to be able to support the committees and the board on how to navigate some of the decisions is a bit challenging. So from a staff perspective, and I'm just sort of speaking selfishly perhaps here, but in order for us to be able to know how and what to pass along as those delegated authorities, sort of the house and everything needs to be in order there. And it really does start with that procedure bylaw, because everything funnels down from that. And then you can parse off other items that are on this list that have been discussed. I mean, of course, something like a remuneration bylaw is different. It doesn't necessarily tie in, but just as far as how everything operates, we're just a little, it's just not clear for, I think, for staff and likely for the board, when you can't go, well, what is our role here? What are we supposed to be doing?
So first of all, my immediate response is that we should really pay close attention to what you just said, because if we do something which makes staff's work easier and more understandable, however you want to express that, then that reflects back to us and helps us with the work that we do around the table. So if we, I'm just looking here, the procedure bylaw is buried at about number 5 or 6 on the list.
It's in no order of priority.
These aren't in order.
It is buried there. Those
Yes,
are
it is.
ideas that we
You're right.
yank it out there and put that as number 1, because it sounds, from what you were saying, it sounds as though you're suggesting everything flows from that.
And I would suggest that perhaps that may be something we may want to consider is sending, this back to staff to put them in order of priority. And then I also think that as far as next steps, we could sort of add into what the presentation we had earlier, because they can sort of run in tandem, right? I think it's good to keep this policy committee meeting going and to have items to discuss as we bring forward. So there could be, an agreement to have Tracy attend the PAD meeting. In the meantime, staff can go back, and we actually also put out an RFP for this governance excellence project. So I think it would be good to go back and pull some of those items that were in that RFP as well that haven't necessarily been addressed, and sort of compile it all and suggest that, this is what staff's recommending. And then from there, because we're not going to be able to do all of them right away, it will be, the procedure bylaw itself has quite a process that needs to be followed. What comes as a result of that, and looking at terms of reference, most of them are going to be pretty cookie cutter. But, as an example, in the first meeting in November, it's elections. Those sorts of things are going to be consistent through all of the different terms of reference where that applies. And then, like PBIS obviously is going to have its own beast. The EAD is going to have its own different rules or processes to follow. So we can sort of tackle those things. But I would suggest that we, ask staff to pull something as far as an order of priority together to bring back to the policy committee to get your support.
Okay.
Chair, Jenna's had her hand up for a while.
Oh,
She doesn't have
I
it now,
can't,
but
I can't see that.
that's okay.
Okay, I'm sorry, Darcy Stoner, go ahead.
No, that's okay. CAO Gilmer just, I think, put forward the solution that I was going to say in terms of bringing this back with the items in a high to low priority based on their experience and the results from the first phase of work with Tracy. And then my only other request for this committee would be if we can try and find a more consistent time to make sure that we just keep pace with the work. And I know that partly that's scheduling conflict, but if we can make this a regular occurring meeting every month or 2 months, whatever it needs to be, I think that would be really helpful just to keep the pace of work going.
Mr. Pennicott?
Yeah, just one other request, and maybe it's too much, but rather than just prioritizing, I would actually appreciate sort of seeing our target date for this is Q1 2025 or whatever, because we may look at that and say like, oh, this isn't until 3 years from now, maybe it's not so relevant, and then we just pull it off. I feel like we get these long priority lists that, might help us manage that a little bit. So if there's, and I don't have a good sense of the staff lift on some of these items, and that would, I think, inform that a little bit.
Ms. Wood?
Thank you. Many of these items could be projects on their own. I'm looking at electronics meeting policy review. That's a policy on its own that we spent a lot of time on at the beginning of the pandemic. But I think could be treated within the procedures bylaw. And it got me thinking that if there's any direction for staff to just look at other regional district policies, procedures, bylaws, etc., that we can use rather than really unpack what we have and try and craft it. I'm sure there are good ones out there that we can copy and paste, and I would far rather us spend our time finding a good one that we can live with and tweak a little bit than to take the one we have, which is cumbersome. And I have been told many times would take a whole bunch of work to fix. To use some templates that are out there would be hopefully, and if I'm wrong, I'm happy to be wrong, can get us farther down the road on this sort of review. So I think procedures bylaw, or staff coming back with a prioritized list of what's here is super useful, and not reinvent the wheel.
Are there examples within the regional district, like
Oh no,
municipalities?
no, because a procedures bylaw in a municipality, I mean, I'm sure there are transferable pieces to it, but
Yes.
looking at another regional district procedures bylaw will probably be far closer to the
Yeah.
framework that we need. And most regional districts are fairly happy to share their work if they've already spent $1 billion getting a great one written. We might as well use theirs if we can.
Okay, no.
I hope it doesn't cost $1 billion.
I'm thinking of what we're going to say to staff at this point. So we want staff to come back to this committee with these suggestions prioritized. Is it good enough to just leave it at
I
that?
would say with estimated timelines for completion or just to cover
Yeah.
any of those. It'd be close. I mean, obviously, once it's actioned, if it doesn't get actioned a little bit later, it might bump it,
Yeah.
but we can do our best guess to see where we can start actioning and have it delivered.
So would somebody like to? Okay, move. Maybe I'll move that. You put it down there. Can I have someone second it? There we go. Business. Any further discussion?
Well, just I think it would generally be up to us to sort of set the priority, but it does seem like, to my mind, there is a fairly logical order here, and so I'm assuming it's fine to sort of not speak too much about priority within these, at least initially. And I sort of assume if we're putting dates, it's not that the expectation isn't we're going to hit them, it's to just be able to check back on them, and when the board asks for something new to be added, we can show them the calendar and say, where does it go? And that sort of thing.
May I make a comment?
Yes, please.
I agree, there may be additional items that come out once we get further into a review, see we look at the procedure bar or whatever it happens to be. So I think reviewing this on maybe it's twice a year, maybe it's whenever we have a large chunk of work done, and then it gets reprioritized. I don't think it's just this is how the priority is going to go. So just to get us started, I think would be a good idea to at least give the committee an idea of what we feel would be the priority to sort of launch this in tandem with what Tracy's doing.
So we had some comments earlier in an earlier meeting about when we make resolutions, whether they're clear enough to staff. So are we being clear enough here? Are you comfortable with what is being expected and asked? Okay, that sounds good. So we had it moved, we got seconded. Vivian, did you want to add anything? No. I'll call a question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Very good. I see it stopped snowing.
May I add a couple of other things as far as next steps? I just had some notes. So we had a discussion about regular occurring meetings.
Yes.
And so maybe we want to, do we want to look at a meeting in January at setting something just to give us some time and through December to gather some work, just so that we have a place marker. So then we can continue, and whether or not the committee wants us to bring something forward as a date suggested for monthly meetings, or if we're just going to set the next meeting at the end of that next meeting. So I think that would be good direction for us to go.
I'm all in favor of setting a meeting right now. It worked out well today, but we had a really short EAD meeting. I don't know if we can always rely on EAD finishing, especially in January, because we've got Tracy coming in, so it might take a bit longer. So perhaps we need to find another date in January. But
Maybe we'll pass staff.
Jenna, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it might be helpful to have a meeting at like the end of January, early February at the latest. So maybe by then Tracy will have finalized her report on the first phase and had some results from the discussion with the EA directors. That gives staff a bit of time to put some timelines and prioritization to the list in front of us. So that would kind of be my suggestion, and maybe the end of January if possible.
Perhaps just as from this, we've just established a lot of the calendars over the last couple of meetings. So if the committee is good with it, we could go back and for the next meeting, perhaps we have staff do another doodle poll for the end of January, beginning of February. And then we can get that one established, and then we'll have sort of a better understanding. We'll have meeting dates in our calendars, so we'll all know our calendars a little bit better for the next time we meet.
So we can do that doodle poll
We'll have-
soon, and,
Yeah.
and so by,
I would say we could do a resolution that staff circulated doodle poll to schedule a meeting for the end of January, beginning of February, based on everyone's availability.
okay, sounds good. So we need a resolution to that effect.
Mhm.
Moved by Director Pettigrew, seconded by Director Ford, that we direct staff to do a doodle poll to set a meeting for this committee for the end of January.
The beginning of February,
Or the
whichever
beginning of
works. Yeah.
February, whichever works. Okay, call the question, all in favour, opposed, motion carries. And we've got.
I have one more, and then I'll stop talking.
This section here is CAO comments.
No, I was talking up today, meeting, so maybe you'll learn here.
Good.
And then wanting to know if the committee wanted to make a resolution to have Tracy attend the EAD meeting on January 10th, just so that we have it. Because these are next steps that we're sort of establishing.
Do we need, I guess we do need a resolution
It
for
would,
that. don't
it would
we?
be good to just have
Formalize
something,
it, to
yeah.
formalize it, okay.
I'd like to
Moved
make
by
that motion,
Ford.
Chair Rainbow.
I'm sorry?
I'd like to make that motion, Chair Rainbow, that we have Tracy attend the EAD in January.
Okay, moved by Director Burke-Jones, seconded by Director Ford. Any comments, questions?
Is this a request to the board or the EAD committee, or whose authority is that?
That would go,
Recommendation.
that would, we have to go in.
Supported by the board.
Recommend to the board that we, yes.
The board would recommend to the EAD committee then,
Oh, yeah, because we don't have authority to.
because the agenda is set by the CAO and the chair of the EAD committee. So does it have to go through the board?
Through the chair, this is a committee of the board, so
Yes.
any recommendations do need to flow through the board. Yeah. I know it is a bit cumbersome
And which is why we
Which
want to
is an
simplify this one.
of, you know, the need to look at the procedures bylaw and create those terms of references for
Right,
committee,
right.
because it'll assist with any of the committee work.
So
Recommending to the board.
recommending to the board,
Yeah.
the chair of the board was the chair of the EAD committee. So, I don't know.
I perhaps read that Tracy Lawrence and be invited to attend the January EAD board meeting.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Vivian, oh, Vivian, no, I'm the vice chair of the EAD.
Mhm.
Oh, okay. That's fine, it goes to the board, yeah,
There we go,
we'll
okay.
deal with it then. Good, okay,
It'd be.
with all those amendments and
Done?
everything like that, all in favor? Opposed, motion carries, good.
I'm not saying anything else.
Promise? Okay.
We have a
Late
window. of when-
business? We've done the late business, that was the late,
That was
you
it.
did the late business, by the way, that's you were number 7, yeah. We're ready to adjourn. So adjourn. Thank you very much, thanks Jenny, thank you Vivian.